I love a good story. When thinking back on my favorite games of all time, a common thread between most of them are their narratives, with a key few of them even managing to carry otherwise weak gameplay. There's no surplus of games with good stories, but despite using an interactive platform, very few actually use the medium to its fullest potential. I can think of all kinds of stories that wowed me in games, but I can only think of a select few where I thought, yes, this only could have been done as a video game. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is one such game. Vanillaware aren't slouches when it comes to making great games. Odin Sphere is a fantastic action RPG, Muramasa isn't too shabby either, and while I haven't played Dragon's Crown yet, I have it on pretty good authority that it's really good as well. But 13 Sentinels is a vast departure for them. Rather than being a fantasy-based 2D action game, it goes for a science fiction real-time strategy game with a greater focus on its narrative. This is very different, but by making this change, it manages to be something even greater than what came before it. A one-of-a-kind sci-fi epic that takes full advantage of the medium to tell a story unlike any other. With that said, I want to talk about the gameplay first, not only because doing things out of order is thematically relevant when talking about 13 Sentinels, but because Atlas themselves haven't really done a good job explaining exactly what the game actually is. 13 Sentinels is split into 3 distinct gameplay modes, and you'll need to interact with all of them to see the game through to the end. The big gameplay of the game lies in Destruction mode, where you'll fight the kaiju in real-time strategy battles. With a few exceptions, all battles have the same end goal, either defeat enough enemies until the game decides that they've had enough, or defend the terminal for 2 real-time minutes. You'll notice I said real-time minutes. When a character's cooldown ends, the game will pause, giving you plenty of time to think about what you want to do. You can either attack, using either normal or EP-consuming specials, you can set a route for the Sentinel to move, you can defend to restore your EP, or you can repair, restoring the Sentinel's health at the risk of exposing your pilot to an easy killing shot. Once per battle, you can also utilize terminal functions, which include stat buffs and debuffs, summoning helper units, or a stage-wide EMP burst to stun enemies. Kaiju come in all shapes and sizes, and you'll need to form a team to account for whatever situation you find yourself in. You can deploy a team of up to 6 Sentinels, with the remainder taking up defensive positions, and each character has different properties based on the generation of their Sentinel. First generations are strong in close quarters combat and are great for taking down singular enemies, but they lack ranged options and have pretty slow movement speeds. Second generations are nice all-rounders, having a decent blend of physical range and supportive actions. It's never bad to have one of these on your team. Third generations excel in long range and are great at crowd control, but they have trouble taking down singular enemies. Finally, the fourth generations are supports. They can fly, allowing for more mobility, and they can summon auxiliary units to help shift the tide of battle. Pro tip, interceptors are busted, so use these as much as possible for an easy time. Based on how much damage a pilot performed, they'll gain experience to level up, gaining boosts to their stats and earning unique pilot skills at certain thresholds. If you think you can get away with just choosing your favorites for each battle, well, no dice there. Piloting the Sentinel is a mentally taxing process, and after 2 battles, a pilot will suffer a brain overload, a fitting name because that's how I feel trying to process the story. This means that they'll have to take 1 battle to recover, meaning that you'll have to shift your party constantly to make sure that you have a layout that always meets your needs. With that said, it is possible to instantly recharge your pilot, but that acts as your score multiplier, which increases with each consecutive win. You might be thinking, why should I care about my score? I know it's 1985, but come on now. And normally you'd be right, but getting high scores is surprisingly important. Really quick, let's talk about Analysis Mode. This is an archive of everything you see in the game. It allows you to rewatch any cutscene at any time, while also sorting them out in chronological order for maximum convenience, and it also includes a glossary of terms and character profiles that are relevant to the story, with them also automatically updating as the game advances. Some of these are sealed though, and you'll need to unlock them with mystery points. How do you get those? By reaching certain score thresholds in Destruction, you'll obtain mystery points, which can then be used to unseal the files. Why does this matter? Certain locks in the story are tied to unsealing a certain number of files, meaning you need to get a high enough score in Destruction to see the game through to the end. There is something of a workaround though, and that's through upgrading the terminal. As its level increases, you can not only purchase more abilities and uses for them in battle, but you can also buy permanent multipliers to your score and meta chips. Meta chips are the game's currency, gained by defeating enemies and clearing segments in the story. These are also used for buying new abilities for your pilots, as well as upgrading them. By advancing through the game, you can also invest chips into individual stats for each pilot, allowing for even more customization. If any of what I just said sounds too overwhelming, the game features 3 difficulty levels, which can be swapped at any time. There's Casual, which makes the game incredibly easy and is there for those who just want to watch the story unfold. There's Normal, which is a decent blend of difficulty, and there's Intense, which is
Your Sentinels beat to shit.
What? I played on Casual for the most part, not because Normal was too difficult or anything, but because Casual just made it way easier to get those S ranks. You're ranked at the end of each battle, and each one also has a set of bonus objectives for you to clear, usually tied to having certain characters in the party, or keeping the terminal or city defenses at certain percentages. By clearing these, you can unlock more files in analysis mode. These won't help you with the locks, but they're good to unlock anyways, not only because hemborger is really funny, but because it's good to get as much information as possible for the sake of keeping up with the story. Okay, no more dancing around it. I just described a lot about that style of gameplay, but that's not where you'll be spending most of the playtime. Most of it will be spent in remembrance mode, where actual gameplay is kept to a minimal and more focus is spent on the story. There's plenty of fun to be had in destruction mode, and there's even extra missions unlocked after clearing the game if you want to keep going. But on the whole, if the idea of spending most of your playtime watching cutscenes and trying to untangle this web of a story doesn't sound appealing, then 13 Sentinels probably isn't for you. In this sense, I've heard some people compare 13 Sentinels to a visual novel, and I can certainly see why. I can also say that 13 Sentinels' story leaves it rubbing elbows with some of the genre's all-time greats. It begins at the end. The year is 1985, and Japan is under attack by monsters known as kaiju. To combat them, 13 high school students pilot mechs known as Sentinels, as they fight for their lives in the final battle for mankind's survival. But what are the kaiju? What are the Sentinels? Who are these 13 students, and what brought them to this point? These mysteries are for you to solve as you navigate 13 Sentinels' vast story, a time-traveling epic spanning hundreds of years. You'll advance the story by selecting one of the 13 protagonists and watching their individual story play out, learning more about who they are and what brought them to the final battle, while also uncovering the truths behind the conflict. Each character's story is split into chunks, usually only taking about a half hour at most to complete. Seeing these chunks through to the end is usually very simple. You walk around in a 2D space and interact with whatever the game tells you to interact with. Enhancing this a bit is the thought cloud. By pushing triangle, you can access a selection of keywords, which you can then gain further details on by selecting them. In addition, certain keywords can be used to interact with the people around you, and can also be used to gain more information or advance the plot. As you gain more keywords, you can reach different outcomes in each story. Some stories are linear, but most branch off at certain points, either through taking different actions or using different keywords. Sometimes just re-entering the story is enough to make a change, while others require a bit more brainpower. The game usually provides hints on how to do this, but sometimes it doesn't, and some of the solutions can be a little bit obscure. But on the whole, advancing through the stories isn't too tough. Usually there's only 1 or 2 things to interact with at any given point, and while certain scenarios present danger, failing these only takes you back to the beginning of the scene, so there's no consequence of failure. The story is told in a non-linear fashion, and this makes the act of following and understanding the story a challenge in and of itself, and seeing how these characters' stories interact with each other is a sight to behold. Since most stories start out from the same location, the next segment will rarely directly follow the previous. Sometimes the fragment will end with a conflict and the resolution lies in another character's story. Sometimes characters will interact with each other and behave in ways that seem unusual, and picking the other route will shed light on their motives. The game starts off with a tutorial forcing you to watch the start of 7 of the stories, but after that you have free reign to follow the story in almost whatever order you want, and I love this. Every story comes with its own revelations about the characters and the overarching plot, and depending on what you see first, it can vastly change your perception of things, leading to vastly different theories and conclusions. It reminds me of the Zero Escape games, particularly Virtue's Last Reward. That game especially has so many plot threads that going down any one route first can lead to a vastly different mindset as you continue through, and 13 Sentinels has that same appeal. I started with Natsuno's story, and the information I gathered from that shifted my perception of the story and led to theories that only I could have come up with by doing that route first. Someone could just as easily start with Juro's story, or Amiguchi's, or Megami's, and any of the information gained from those could lead someone to a vastly different conclusion. Nobody's playthrough of 13 Sentinels will be exactly the same, and I think that's fascinating. The game does force a bit of structure through the locks though, which can be cleared by watching an event in another character's story, reaching certain percentages of story completion, or engaging with the other modes. Remembrance is also where the game's visuals shine the most. Yeah, it's a Vanillaware game, of course I was going to have to talk about the visuals. To start, Destruction Mode is very simple comparatively, but it's still visually engaging, and I'm honestly impressed with the amount of scope battles manage to have despite these limitations, even if blowing up actual hundreds of enemies with one missile has the tendency to make my PS4 cry out in pain. But the visuals in Destruction have nothing on the visuals for Remembrance. Vanillaware are the kings of 2D, and though the aesthetic is a far cry from what they've worked on previously, it's no less detailed. It's not too uncommon to spend time just standing around looking at the light shining through these lush backgrounds, and there are a number of set pieces that are just absolutely beautiful to see play out. The Day 1 version of the game physically even comes with an art book, showing off the character and Sentinel designs and all their beautiful details. The soundtrack is also fire too. The themes in Remembrance do a great job complementing the various situations and emotions displayed throughout, and the themes during Destruction are so good. The standard battle themes are really good, and when there's a rare set piece, the music changes to complement them, making each one a memorable moment. Memorable is just one of the many words I'd use to describe 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. It's beautiful, it's fun, and it's incredibly engaging. I would spend hours while at work mentally reviewing everything that I had seen, trying to work my way to the truth, cooking up theories and trying to beat the game to its reveals, only for it to later pull back the curtain and reveal something that I not only couldn't have possibly predicted, but something that itself is only part of a larger whole. Even now, I still just stop and think about what I played, piecing together every fragment, every bit of information, and how it all tied together by the end. And I feel upset that I'll never be able to experience the story for the first time again. I haven't been this sucked into a narrative since last year's Eye of the Somnium Files, and trust me, when you're being compared to I, you've done something right. If you own a PlayStation 4 and have any interest in science fiction or interactive storytelling, you definitely shouldn't sleep on 13 Sentinels. Games like these only come every so often, and it would be a shame for you to miss out on what I sincerely think is now one of my favorite stories I've ever played. I can only hope for two things: that 13 Sentinels eventually finds its way to other systems so that more people can experience it, and that Vanillaware will one day make another game that blows me away the same way that this one did. Until that time comes, I still need to unpack everything that I've seen, so until next time, see ya.